Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Edu Focus, a series by Network of Education Policy Centers. My name is Raffaella, and today I'm pleased to host Matea Brejc from the National School of Leadership in Education from Slovenia. Welcome, Matea, and thank you for joining us. And Franz Grobe from the NSO-CNA Leiderschapsacademie from the Netherlands. Welcome, Franz, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Both organizations have a very long experience in providing professional development program for school principals, which is our today topic. Our network of education policy centers has been dealing with the topic of professional development for a while now, but more intensively from 2019 because we are implementing an Erasmus Plus project empowering school principals for inclusive school culture. So a very wide body of research show how school leaders have a significant role in creating inclusive school culture, in teachers' motivation and commitment, resulting in better students' achievement. Not only, but school leadership are only the second to the classroom instruction among the related factors that influence to the achievement of students and school atmosphere. Despite it, very often in our region, this profession is with very little pre-service education and in-service support. So the structure of our head project is that we somehow try to exploit the experience from Slovenia and the Netherlands, and with the experience of our partners in Croatia and Macedonia to pilot a professional development program for primary and secondary school principals based on creating inclusive school culture. To complete the story of our project, the Education Research Institute from Slovenia will try to measure the impact of the program through a baseline and an endline study. Today, our focus is the Slovenian and Dutch experience in providing professional development programs for school principals. Both organizations have very long experience in this area. So, Matea and Franz, can you briefly provide us a short a presentation of how the professional development program for school principals is structured in your country? Let's start with Matea.
Okay, thank you, Raffaella. Thank you for inviting me. And yes, I will start with the presentation. I will talk from the point of view of our institution. So the National School for Leadership in Education in Slovenia has been established by the government 26 years ago as a national institution aimed at supporting and developing school principals. We have basically started at that point with a couple of programs for principals only. But at that point, we also had a clear focus of providing primarily the so-called headship license program. So this headship license program is the program that principals in our country have to finish before or in the first year of being appointed to the position of school principal. However, looking back, I think it has been, I think I can say clear from the beginning that one of the long-term ideas actually was to support head teachers or principals also after they complete the headship license program, which is, by the way, also the only program that is mandatory for our principals, or other programs are based on their choices. So we had at the beginning this core program and a couple of annual conferences. But later on, we have started to develop what we now call the system of lifelong learning for principals, which actually enables principals' professional development in various forms and also in different career stages that they have. It builds on an ever-developing definition of what school leadership actually is, and lately very much emphasizes the importance of collaborative, the importance of distributed leadership. So it's basically not just about principal anymore. Of course, he's still in the core of our let's say activities, but we think about other school leaders in schools as well. And this system of lifelong learning emphasizes also system leadership. System leadership in terms of enabling school leaders to take different roles outside of the schools as well. So if I try to be a little more concrete, the system of lifelong learning for principals in our context mean that we have programs that guide and support principals in the so-called induction or preparation phase. That is the headship license program. In the initial phase or the first year when they are being appointed, in this year, we have a program called Mentoring for Newly Appointed Head Teachers, where we combine some seminars that they attend with mentoring provided to them by skilled head teachers. And by skilled head teachers in this case, I mean teachers that have been in their positions for at least 5 years and have also undergone some training before that in order to become mentors, while the majority of programs and activities are run in the so-called in-service. We might probably even call it lifelong learning phase. The offer of those programs vary actually throughout the years. We develop and provide them according to trends in school leadership, according to needs our school principals have, according to what is current in our educational context. And at the moment, we offer different programs that last from 1 day to up to a year. And in these programs, we cover current topics, we cover legal and financial issues, we have the so-called short thematic conferences. We run, for instance, a program that's called Networks for Developing School Leadership, and is based very much on peer collaboration and peer learning. So we actually join head teachers to learn together, to search for their specific solution. And one of the recent focuses for a number of years actually now is also supporting principals by counseling, peer counseling and coaching. And those activities and this support actually is focused primarily on improving instructional or pedagogical leadership in schools. And along with these programs that are aimed for head teachers primarily, we have, I think over 20 years ago, started also with the programs that involve different school teams. Let's say development team for quality, or different school leaders, head teachers, assistants, leaders of subject groups, etc. And by those programs, we encourage and develop actually this collaborative and distributed school leadership. And in this way, build in-school support for principals, because we teach them this or we train them leadership skills. All of the mentioned programs, and I of course did not list them all, are, let's say, combined or upgraded or supplemented by, for instance, annual Leadership in Education conference, regular publishing of a journal, Leadership in Education, thematic papers, monograph, guidelines. And lately also numerous international activities, projects, Erasmus mobilities and things like that. Also, maybe because we are still in this pandemic period, during the pandemic, yeah, we ran all of our programs online. And we actually plan to deliver the programs in the next school year, probably in the future as well, in a blended form. That means combining face-to-face and combining e-learning. And by that, we also, one of our focuses will be to build on these digital competencies of school principals as well.
Thank you, Mattea. Very brief but very dense presentation. We will come back to you a little bit later to discuss a little bit in details this main feature of the program. Frans, what about the Netherlands?
Thank you, Rafaela, and thank you for inviting us in this conversation and your head project. We are happy to share some of the Netherlands experiences on school leadership training. And what's very interesting for us also in our collaboration with Slovenian colleagues is that by comparing and contrasting our approaches, you get more the idea of how this school leader training is, well, emerged from the educational system in your countries. Because NSO stands for the Netherlands School of Educational Management, but it is really, it's not a state institution like Mattea's institution is, but it's a private institution like the rest of the education system in the Netherlands is all privately organized but publicly financed. That's a typical situation in the Netherlands. We go a little bit further into that. That school organization and also school support systems or school leadership training is to a large extent organized by private foundations or organizations. And the school leadership training in the Netherlands was originated in the 80s of the last century. And there was a public debate in the Netherlands that you should make individual schools more responsible on student outcome. So they had to become more responsible on the results of their teaching. But to make them more accountable on the results in their schools, you have to make the school leaders more, support them in their managerial work. So school management as a separate profession was first introduced in the 80s in the Netherlands. And since then, it's not really a national coordinated system of professional training or professional standards. Unlike the situation in Slovenia, as Mattea just mentioned, we don't have a national headship license. We don't have national standards. We don't have government standards. We have, in the Netherlands, national professional standards. So we very much rely upon the professional group of school leaders to come up with what they consider a professional standard for their job. As in the Netherlands, as in most countries, the school leaders are, of course, former teachers. We don't have a lot of persons in leadership positions who come from outside the education system. So we have a lot of former teachers who suddenly appear in a leadership position. They become school head. But of course, they have a background in a subject, like mathematics, for instance. And so they have to, they have to work their way into a management position. And this professional association in the Netherlands came up with a professional standard, which has something to do with what they have 5 elements. vision-directed working. It's about the vision on learning and teaching. It's about staff development. How do you run your staff? It's about school development, also the managerial issues and the financial issues. It's about quality in education. How do you measure your learning outcomes and improve your learning outcome in school? And it's the fifth element is how do you deal with your school in relation to the outside world? Because in the Netherlands, schools are now more associated with youth care, but with also different stakeholders around the school. So what we do in NSO is we have a program like what Mateja mentioned in Slovenia. You also have some sort of a orientation on school leadership. What is it? You have your introductory courses, and then we have an elaborate master program for school leaders in end responsible positions. And you have, of course, also middle management programs, but we have a master program for school leaders in end responsible positions, and that is well, it's a very elaborate program, but it's very relevant for school leaders in primary as well as secondary education, because in the Netherlands they have a very autonomous, very responsible function, because the education system is quite decentralized, and we go further into that. But as a summary, a lot of attention on the professional development, the professional association, and how you as a leadership institute, how we as a leadership institute can contribute to the development of the profession, school leadership as a profession, can develop and support their autonomy and boundaries around the profession, their professional identity, and support them in the quality of their work and the accountability of the school leader in their position. That's some introduction from the Netherlands side.
From the Netherlands side. Thank you, Frans. You mentioned at the beginning that you were comparing the two systems. So I just wanted to briefly introduce that national NLSL from Slovenia and NSO-CNA from the Netherlands co-authored a paper comparing the two systems. And the paper will appear. The link to the paper will appear in the first comment to this video. But it's also clear from your introduction some main feature of the system. Frans, you mentioned a lot of time autonomy, responsibility. So it seems to me that freedom, autonomy are the main feature of education system, and somehow the values on which the system is built. Can you briefly share how this influenced and affected the professional development for school principals? To which extent these autonomies and freedom is visible?
Yeah. The Dutch education system is characterized by a very decentralized system, and you don't know that yourself until you compare your system with colleagues from abroad, of course, but because you're used to the system yourselves, you don't really know how it's organized in other countries often. And when we discussed also in the HEAD project how we would suggest or come up with models for the Croatian and Macedonian partners in our project, well, we realized that to come up with suggestions to organize your professional development, you really have to look into what is the educational system, what is the role, the formal authority and role of the school leader, and how is this profession organized? Is it considered to be a profession? And when we did this comparison with our Slovenian partners in the project, we realized that what's called in the Netherlands freedom of education It originated almost 100 years ago, and the freedom of education was that parent groups could organize schooling for themselves. They could organize, for instance, from a religious perspective, Catholic schools or Protestant schools, or they could organize education in schools concerning a specific pedagogical principle, Jena Plan schools or Steiner schools. And that freedom of education was very important also, that the different categories of schools would also decide upon what would be the best school leader for their schools. So the Dutch school leader is, as we compare it, or OECD reports showed, that the Dutch school leader is the most autonomous school leader, I think, in the world. Autonomous in the sense that they have a lot of autonomy to decide on the school level how to invest in new equipment, how to work with teaching materials, how to hire staff. So this autonomy is very central to the Dutch education system. And autonomy, a lack of standardization at the national level. So really individual school boards, as we call them, school boards is the governing board of individual schools. They decide themselves how the school is governed. And that is why we don't have so much national standards, and we leave it to a large extent up to the profession. But because this school leader has a very high autonomy, relating to this autonomy, the school leader has a lot of room to initiate relations with outside parties around the school. So because this is his or her position in the system, the school leadership training has to support the school leader in the Netherlands in this autonomous role. And what we found out in working together in the HEAD project is that the education systems differ, the formal authority and role of school leaders differ, and their professional association differs. So depending on that, we came up with suggestions to support the development of school leadership training in Croatia and Macedonia.
Thank you. It seems to me that there is a kind of a personal match between the school and the school principals. Kind of like the autonomy and the freedom is that somehow it's so at school level that there is a match between the school and the school leaders not being a national standards. And this is a very interesting perspectives. And as you said, we realize how our system works when we compare to the others. Otherwise, we are not aware of the many features of the systems in which we live. So Matea, in your introduction regarding the system in Slovenia, you mentioned a few times the continuous support you provide to school principals. Can we come back to see how this measure look like? So which kind of follow-up activities you have with school principals in Slovenia?
Yeah, we actually have quite a lot of, let's say, follow-up activities besides the headship license program. Very different activities, from one-day programs to national conferences to longer-term programs. But I think that one important features actually of our lifelong learning system is just this focus on collaboration and networking between principals. between principals of kindergartens, primary and secondary schools primarily. And I would perhaps just briefly emphasize two aspects of this collaboration and networking. First is the different roles that principals have or play in our programs, and the principals networking, or we call it also professional collaboration and joint learning. In both of those aspects or approaches, I think has become a successful way in designing what Franz was also mentioning, context-specific solution for leading schools. So as indicated in our programs, principals have different roles. Besides just being the participants of different programs and activities. And I think it's really hard actually to come to either of our activities and just sit and listen. So you actually have to collaborate, but they have, as I said, many roles. They are, for instance, members of our institution's board. They are members of editorial board of journal that we publish. They are co-authors of different publications that we prepare. We can also put them our project partners. But I think most importantly, that they are involved in our programs as co-designers, and they run them together with us. So they actually act as I already said, mentors, let's say, to newly appointed head teachers. They do external, individual, or group expert counseling to principals from other schools in kindergartens. And they also come to different programs to just shortly, let's say, present what they actually do, what is their best practice, what advice maybe they have for those that enter the headship license program. So this is one of the features that I think it's very powerful in our institution, but also in the system. On the other hand, we support and facilitate networking also by running programs that are based on peer collaboration and learning, action research, networking between different schools, not just principals. Also in the last year, due to the pandemic, for instance, we have introduced monthly professional discussions for principals that take place online and are aimed at presenting current topics by the lecturers of the National School for Leadership in Education and current practices by principals. So it's a good way how to, let's say, combine, maybe balance theory, research, and practice, which is also important because sometimes theory, research, or let's say system expectations could be far away from what principals actually do or can do. So this is something I think worth mentioning. Something that's worth mentioning also, I think, is that a lot of networking between principals on a regional level or between similar schools is also present outside our programs. So perhaps we could conclude that networking has become, in our system, a well-recognized and used approach at system level between schools as well as in schools. And it's interesting that one of the studies of situation during the pandemics has indicated that there has actually been more collaboration, especially in schools, than before the pandemic. So one of the challenges for the future, I think, in our system now in schools for our principals is how to keep on the momentum, how to recognize these improvements as well as make them sustainable. So I think it's basically also something that we wrote in our paper, a question about continuous building of good collaboration between different stakeholders for the empowerment school principals for their professionalism, autonomy, and trusted position. And most importantly, I think it's a question or a challenge, an everlasting challenge actually, of enabling school principals to take additional system leadership roles in peer and policy networks across school boundaries. And of course, one of the challenges I think I have to mention here is that we are facing is also how to get all head teachers on board. So it's not that every head teacher is involved in everything, because we are a small institution, but I think that yearly over, I don't know, nearly 90% of head teachers join some of the programs, but still a question that is popped up quite frequently lately is how to get everybody on board. So that's one of our challenges for the future as well.
Okay, that's a good way to conclude. Sometimes a challenge for the future. Franz, do you have any challenges for the future?
Now, well, when we compared our work in the Netherlands with the work of Mateja in Slovenia, then we realized that, and we're very much inspired by their stressing these learning networks after they finish their more or less formal education. So I think what we can do better in that, so that also when they are in this position and they have their formal trainings, to support them in their networking in between schools. So that I think that would be a challenge for us to do. Another challenge is, I think that school leaders have in the Netherlands have, well, their responsibilities are growing and growing. They are not only responsible now for the learning outcome in schools, but they are considered also to take part in more or to be supportive of, well, societal issues. Newcomer education, for instance, but also more inclusive school structures, parent involvement. So I think one of the challenges of Dutch school leaders is to open up the school more than they did before, and to help them in that, doing that. So how do you work across your school boundaries in society? That is a major challenge, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So it's about building a community. That seems to be a very actual topic, not only in education, but in all other spheres of societies. The community building. I told you at the beginning that I was in the implementation of the third module of the professional development program for school principals. This was implemented by Open Academy step-by-step creation. And it was the third module for school principals for primary school. And I was really impressed at the beginning. They had this reflection session about what they can see as changing their school already regarding inclusive school culture and democratic culture. And I was really impressed by what they said, because they already starting talking about a kind of a transformation that they can see in their schools, more positive relationship with parents, more collaborative relationship with parents, try to establish individualized approach and relationship with students in a vulnerable position, and also a kind of more open attitude at school level towards the community. I was also one of the school principals that was there shared that she's considering that we are still living in a time of a crisis with a lot of negative news around us, that she's trying to share some kind of more positive and to enhance and to encourage more positive atmosphere in schools, to organizing some gathering and so on. So I was really impressed how at the third module of the program, we can already see a kind of a very, I would say, salient transformation at school level. Considering you both have, I think, met thousands of school principals in your professional positions, what they usually tell you about how this support help them in their profession? Franz or Matteo, who would like to start?
Well, I can. What we often hear from the participants in our programs is that they say, well, in preparing for this school leadership position, the education got me more strategic and got me more across the boundaries of my individual professional career till then. Because as we said, well, often the school leaders are subject teachers, and they are not used to working across the boundaries of the school. They are not used to work across the whole school itself. So the two remarks we often get is that, okay, the education made us more strategic, more aware of the whole school approach, and it got us stronger in our personal qualities in fulfilling that important job to be a school head. And one more remark about school leadership and inclusive school cultures. Till now, often leadership was associated with a person or personal traits of an individual. A leader is someone with these kind of traits. But as Matteo also mentioned before, we are now far more interested also in collaborative leadership approach, where leadership is not per se a characteristic of an individual, but is more a function, a leadership function, which has to be performed by groups and not only the individual in a formal school head position.
Okay.
Matteo, what about this opinion?
Well, I'm happy to hear actually that the feedbacks from principals in pilot head program are positive, and I can actually rely them quite easily to the feedbacks or to the most to the most common feedbacks actually that we in a way get from our principals, and that also emphasize the importance of professional development program being first of all that there's variety, but on the other hand the more effective programs are usually the ones that are long term, that combine some, let's say, lectures, discussions with actual activities in schools, so that I can actually also I don't know, see how the theory or how some guidelines actually work in my own context. So National School for Leadership in Education offers a lot of programs and activities. And in general, we could also talk about a variety of skills and competencies that principals gain or develop, but at different stages of their careers. But to emphasize just, as I said, the ones that are most general, but also very valuable, I think I could say, and I'm not trying to rank them, but the skill or the competence that they do actually develop or build on is collaboration. Collaboration between principals, with their staff, with parents. So basically we provide them with systematic opportunities, some guidelines, and sometimes also the tools how to do it as efficiently as possible. So the next skills that they really appreciate are those skills that are transferable to their work. So it's about applicability of those skills, be it communication, be it strategic thinking, be it planning, leading professional development in school, teamwork, things like that. I could go on and on. The next set of skills are skills that are linked to solving real life or real school challenges and problems. Yeah, definitely. So it's about problem solving, and lately we have also put more attention to developing skills linked to well-being of principals, and well-being of their teachers, their children. So well-being in general, not just knowledge, but because that's also some of the maybe that will be some of the positive results of this pandemic, that we also think about things that we cannot measure objectively, or at least we think that we can measure them objectively. So it's also how to deal with stress, how to build relationships, things like that. And one thing I also need to mention, and relates to also what Franz said, crossing actually the boundaries. It's not what I'm about to say, it's not a skill or a competence, but it is really important, and this is the big picture. So pull me out of my specific context and widen my horizon with things that I perhaps myself didn't think about.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a combination of personal and professional development.
Yeah, and one more important thing is, I think, what happens in the training in Slovenia as well in the Netherlands, it's professional development of people who all are already in this professional role. So they bring their own context, their own daily work, their own issues at school. They bring those issues into the training, and then in the training they get comments and reflections. So it's not management training out of context. It's always in context of their role, and that's very important.
We said at the beginning, the aim of the project is to pilot the professional development in Croatia and North Macedonia with the aim of mainstreaming. You have made very clear that this is really about contextualization, and that the context of the education system in each country is very important, that we cannot create something from another country for a country, that we really need to contextualize what we want to do. But according to your experience, can you recognize some milestones for the mainstreaming of professional development program for school leaders? Franz, maybe we can start with you.
That's Rafaela, what you just mentioned was one of our key findings, is that we say, well, three main building blocks of school leadership training is to really be very precise about what do you expect from a school leader in your system. So to be very, what is the accountability and role of school leader? And so the school leader training has to support this organizational role, the role of people in a leadership position. So the milestones would be to, depending on the countries, because we work with Croatia and Macedonia, to be very precise on what do you expect from people in leadership positions in schools, their organizational role, and how you can support this organizational role by your trainings. And that trainings can be on defining the more personal qualities of people in those roles, personal qualities like problem-solving issues, more social, working with groups, and more psychological taking initiative. So the personal qualities, personal leadership skills, you might say, to help people, well, really grow into that role, because up to then most of them are subject teachers, as we discussed. So how to help them in this, grow into this role, and secondly, so be really precise about what is the task of the school leader and how you can support them with training. That would be the main advice.
Matteo would like to add something.
Yeah, I would always like to add something. But I think that this is one of the really good benefits of this international collaboration. How we open each other's, I would not really say horizons, but sometimes wider the perspective. And I think that's also something that we need to have in mind when preparing or thinking about professional development for principals. For instance, one of the things that principals get in our programs, or at least we try to provide them, is the big picture. The big picture, which means not just understand my school context, national context, but also what's happening globally, because we are being more and more influenced by some developments, and I think that well, some say that changes happen very fast, but on the other hand, that we need to be aware that they will never happen so slow anymore. So that's something that we need to also, I think, have in mind. But as Franz already mentioned, we have provided some recommendations in the paper. And if I try to think even more specifically from the point of view of our context, what were some of the milestones? I think I can say that the first milestone was establishing our institution. But it's at the end, it's not about the institution, it's about the program being recognized systemically, one way or the other. Then I think the next milestone would be that in a couple of years, we have actually started to widen or deepen our list of programs. So try to actually get this comprehensive, perhaps support to school principals. We were, of course, following development and trends of leadership, but were, on the other hand, I think, quite sensitive with regards to what has already been mentioned several times in this conversation, with regards to policy borrowing. By actually paying attention or taking into account our own national context first. So of course we would like to be at one point more like, I don't know, some other school system that is according to some standards more, I don't know, effective or efficient or just better. But we have to start from our position and being built on our good practice. And when you start digging, there's actually a lot of it. There's actually a lot of it. After 2006, we had almost continuous also project funding for developing different aspects of school leadership and quality. And those projects were based on the systems initiative, and they will also run in collaboration with different institutions and institutes. So it's really important for institutions on a system level to collaborate to provide this comprehensive, also, let's say, or complete support to school leaders. Along that, we have gained a certain degree of international recognition, which I think also helps in establishing the programs in also being in touch with the recent developments. But to close my addition to what Hans already said, I think that certainly the most important thing, not so much the milestone, but the condition, or perhaps even the precondition, is a general trust of our principals. And their willingness and also need in a way to attend and collaborate in different programs and activities that are aimed at improving and developing school leadership in general.
Maybe I may add one more, I think, important thing in the Dutch context is, of course, apart from developing good programs for people in leadership positions, I think in the Dutch situation also a milestone has been the self-organizing process of school leaders in their professional associations. I mentioned that is, I think, a main feature of our situation, that school leaders themselves try to define their profession, their boundaries, their identity, and also the professionals come up with professional standards to which we as a training institute provide programs to support these professional standards. So the professional group itself says, this is who we are as a profession, and then we as a training institute say, if this is your standard, we suggest the following training programs. So so I'm very curious how this professional self-organization is taking place in Croatia and Macedonia. I'm not sure to what extent or what initiatives, but
we will have a lot of opportunities to discuss in different contexts our project. Okay, thank you, Franz and Mattea, for this overview of the professional development programs and structure in Slovenia and in Netherlands. And for all the things, for all the perspectives that somehow came out. I appreciate a lot the freedom and autonomy from the Netherlands. Somehow reminds me of the responsibility that we have, because autonomy and responsibility they come together, and a lot about this discussion about community from Slovenia and collaboration. So thank you both, and yes. We see each other maybe in another Edu Focus or in the next meetings. Thank you, Mattea and Franz, for being with us today. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.